Hello everyone, new video here, Sunday, February 23rd, 2025. New video series, in fact, the history of Yahwism and its relationship to the Bible, part 1. It's going to be an ongoing series because it's not something that can be done in one video, really, unless it's going to be really long, but I'd actually rather break this up, and I think after considering how best to do this series, what I'm going to do is I'm going to begin each part with a discussion of the history of Yahwism, the worship of Yaho, Yahweh, Jehovah. I use Yaho because I believe it's the best way to say the full form of the divine name of the God of the Bible, the Tetragrammaton, Yod-He-Wah-He, as well as the three-letter form that we find in Elephantine papyri of the 4th, 5th century, as well as the Greek phonetic forms of that same form, Yod-He-Wah, in 4Q Leviticus B, for example, of the 1st century BCE, and Diodorus, Greek historian of the 1st century BCE, both use Yod to Alpha Omega, which corresponds to Yod-He-Wah of the Jews in Elephantine, as well as the most recent finding dated to the 13th century, 500 years earlier than what was considered the earliest instance of the divine name in the Moabite inscription, which we're going to look at more closely in a moment. So, not everyone knows about the inscription, the 13th century use of Yod-He-Wah in the most ancient form of the Hebrew alphabet that corresponds to the Elephantine Yod-He-Wah, the Greek Yod Alpha Omega, spanning over a period from the 13th century to the 1st century, and I argue is also consistent with the 4-letter form of the divine name, with a final He, because I believe this is also shown in Elephantine in several forms, Yod-He-He, a final He in Hebrew and in Moabite, since we're going to look at the Moabite Stone, can represent and does represent often an O sound, because we're dealing with a period where Hebrew was written without vowel points, but where certain letters represented vowel sounds. So there are early Hebrew forms of the divine name. And in a recent video, for example, right here, let me just show you this video here I did, one of my most recent live streams. I talk about this chart right here. And it's kind of a chronology of the divine name from its earliest usage at this point, which is, as I've been saying, I have a video on this as well, and I'll put a link below to one of the the most detailed analysis of the finding after it was found and evaluation by scholars. That it's pretty clear. Right? There's always critics, but the best evidence, and if you look at the video I'm going to link below, I think you'll see we've got a form of the divine name, Yod-He-Wah, at the Mount Ebal location, related to events in the Bible where Moses said that the Israelites were to curse Mount Ebal upon their arrival. And we have a curse tablet cursing Mount Ebal in the name of Yaho, Yod-He-Wah, God of the Bible. So it's not only further evidence of the early events of the Bible related to Moses, Joshua, and the people after the Exodus coming into the promised land, but also of the God they worshipped, Yaho. So the Moabite stone from the 9th century has Yod-He-Wah-He, but again, final He in Hebrew and in Moabite can represent an O sound. And I believe it just eventually was retained either for easier recognition of the final O sound, or because Various people wanted to change the pronunciation of the name. Certainly, I think we get to that point once we get to the Masoretic text, where the final hey becomes more of a final aspirant sound, separate from the wa, yod, the wa o sound. So Yaho, ah, right, is how you start to get it pointed in the Masoretic text. Not always, though. And so either way, you have this development of the divine name now from the 13th century. Okay? People often wonder, scholars and others who study these issues related to the divine name, since, the God of the Bible is specific to the nation of the Israelites, right? The Hebrews, they were freed from Egypt. And then before that, of course, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. This is from the Bible, right? I'm a Bible believer, not just blindly, but because I believe it represents credible history. I don't think it's without any errors, right? So we're a little bit different, at least people like me, in terms of inerrancy. But I don't think it has to be. I don't think any credible history is free from all errors from ancient history, but it's still determinable, more or less, depending on the subject and text. So where it concerns the divine name, I believe we have evidence that shows that the God of the Bible has been worshipped at least since the 1300s. Okay, now, if you were looking at the Bible itself, the accounts in the Bible, which we will read in some parts related to these subjects, then, of course, it goes back much earlier. We have, for example, God's name used all throughout Genesis, from Genesis chapter 2. We have Eve in Genesis chapter 4, verse 1, crediting Yaho by name with the birth of Cain. Then we have Yaho becoming known as the one who curses the ground because Cain kills Abel. And before that, both Cain and Abel were sacrificing to Yaho, I believe, because of the sin that followed from the events in the Garden of Eden, which led men to begin to sacrifice in recognition of the things they were doing in violation of what they knew was right and wrong, which they inherited from Adam and Eve, right directly, right? No real lineage to have to wait for. It just passed right on in our view, this understanding of right and wrong, and so the punishment passed along too. But because Yahweh was allowing for humans to continue in order to, in our view, fulfill the prophecy he gave in Genesis 3, I have a whole video on it. It's our view again. You'll have to agree with us. A lot of people don't. I'm giving you what my view is as a worshiper of Yahweh, and as a general discussion of the origin of the history of the worship of Yahweh, and deal with some of the issues related to the Bible and its presentation of Yahweh as well. We'll be taking a look at 2 Kings chapter 3, related to the events on the Moabite Stone, which was, again, previously the earliest inscription, of the divine name, prior to the Mount Ebal finding. Now, so people who've studied the divine name, like me, and in the video I just showed you as well, I talked about this little, and in my writings for decades, many people believe the original form of the divine name was Yo, right? Yod, Wa, which you would normally pronounce today in Hebrew as Yo. But in ancient times, and maybe even better today, it is in Hebrew, Yao. Now, listen to that carefully. If the original form of the divine name was Yod, Wa, Yo, or Yao, that sounds pretty close to Yao, doesn't it? Think of it. Listen to it. Yao. Yao. So in my view, the original form of the divine name, if it was Yod Wa, developed into Yod He Wa, Yao, because of the close phonetic association between Yod Wa and Yod He Wa. And eventually, a final hey was used more frequently to indicate a final O sound. So that's why we see, for example, in the Elephantine papyri of the 4th and 5th centuries, not just Yod He Wah, which corresponds to the Greek phonetic form Yaho, which we find in the 1st century BCE, 4Q Leviticus B, biblical text, Diodorus, Greek historian, but also corresponds to the 13th century finding at Mount Ebal. So we have also at Elephantine a form Yod He He, which I believe shows they were using the final He again as a vowel marker, corresponding in this case to the Wah, the O sound that they were used to in Yod He Wah. So that's why sometimes you'll see them use Yod He He, because they were also using the final He as a vowel sound or a O sound. So you get this variation, but they all mean the same thing, I believe. Yaho, or potentially most anciently or originally Yaho, which is basically the same as Yaho. So that having been said, when it comes to the history or the origin of the worship of Yaho, we have the biblical records that talk about, as I said, the worship of Yaho from Genesis 2 all the way in through Genesis 4. Yahweh is attributed with the birth of children. Sacrifices are given to him. He curses the ground and punishes people. So all of these things, in accordance with the biblical stories, would be things everyone would know about who lived during this time and thereafter. Everyone would know this God Yahweh. So then you move into the period where other children are born. Seth is born. Seth gives birth to Enosh, not Enoch, but Enosh. When the Bible says in Genesis 4:26, a start began in terms of calling on the name of Yahweh. And I believe that has to do with the break between the time that Yahweh cursed the land and things changed pretty dramatically, and until the time when, just kind of giving a general discussion. We're going to read some text, but I'm trying to keep this simple and straightforward. We'll look more closely at anything you want, okay? I'm going to show you a site in a moment, channel called Myth Vision, very popular atheist channel, and a video on it that I'll be kind of summarizing in a moment. So stay tuned for sure, and also the discussion of 2 Kings 3. But just for a moment back on this subject, right? So we've got evidence, like I said, the inscription, the curse tablet at Mount Ebal, 13th century. We've got the Moabite Stone, 9th century. Right, we've got other things like I showed you here, the Ketef Hinnom scrolls, silver amulets, 6th, 7th centuries BCE, Lakish inscription, same time, right? So the worship or the, the worship, right? If you're cursing a mountain in the name of your God, you're worshiping that God. You're doing what he's telling you to do. At least to the 13th century. Now, in the biblical stories, it goes back further, right? So we've talked about that to a point, all the way through to Seth, to Enosh, Genesis 4, and then a little bit after that, we get to Noah, right? How Noah would bring peace to the land. So let's bring up, in fact, Bible Hub. Well, let me show you actually the Myth Vision channel. I kind of want to relate this to in some way. Now, so this is Myth Vision. I'll take myself off there. It's a popular atheist channel. And, I'm sorry. You know, a lot of people will watch it or share videos. And I got a question, actually. This video directly relates to a question I got recently from Prodigal Son. I'm sure he'll comment below when he sees this video. I told him I'd do this video yesterday, but I got hung up with some angel stuff, as you saw. Either way, this is a bit important series I wanted to talk about also because of things, not just on Myth Vision's channel, but elsewhere, where this subject has been coming up more. Now, back to Myth Vision. So, this is an atheist channel, right? He's not a Christian. He used to be. He's not anymore. But I still find him reasonable. And I don't find him to be like, I don't think he gets everything right, of course, right? Who does, right? Most of us don't think, just for a minute here, I'll put myself up, that the other side is getting everything right. But I think they at least acknowledge things that show a reasonable side. And by they, I mean mostly the guy who hosts this channel. Again, I don't know him really at all. I just watch some of the videos, or have for the last several months. Mostly since this whole West Huff thing started happening. I've seen a few other videos flash up from Myth Vision before. But then I started watching Gnostic Informant, his friend Neil, he's a pretty cool guy. Well, I don't know him, but he seems like, I like his style, you know. He seems like he'd be a good guy to talk to in terms of these issues. He comes at it from a totally different perspective. Okay, these are not Christians. You need to understand that. I'm speaking positively of them because, well, it's it's not just Christians, even if it is Christians at all, who deserve that kind of positive evaluation, right? We got to look at people for who they are. So if you're dealing with atheists or people who aren't Christian at least, well, then you got to accept that and then evaluate them in terms of what they are. Not in terms of what you want to project them to be, right? Then you'll never be satisfied with anybody. So I try to look at them in terms of, okay, and they had, in terms of the guy who hosts this channel, I'm sorry, I forget his name. Again, I don't know them very well. I just watch some of the guests they have. And I've seen Gnostic Informant a little bit more, so I'm more familiar with his name. I know it is Neil. So I like their style, though. You know, they like to get into stuff, and I think they allow a lot more than, whether they agree or not, it's hard to tell, you know. Probably they have to let a lot go that they don't always agree with. That's just the way it is, you know. Still. So anyway, I like them in terms of the way they deal with things, even though we totally disagree, okay? But remember, those of you who are kind of like me in terms of theology, we're not like the people they deal with a lot, which are mostly the Protestants, right? The inerrantists, right? The people who believe the Bible's, without any error, and they view it in a way that is more difficult to defend than our view, which is solas veritas, best available reasons. We don't believe anything has to be perfect to be accurate in terms of what we're relying on. We don't rely on errors that we can see our errors, and that doesn't make the whole document valueless or without reliability potential. So it's the same with any other historical source for us. Yes, it has a religious association, but that doesn't make it less important to me and others. It makes it more important. And if you believe in God and you believe in history, well, then you see all these things as related in a way that fits and makes sense and doesn't have to be perfect. So we're not as susceptible to the attacks that people like Myth Vision and Neil might, rightly or wrongly direct towards people like Wes Huff or others, right? And we have to deal with them too, don't we? Not necessarily Wes directly, although he says a lot of stuff that, as we know, right? Trinity and other things, not correct. But people who are on my side are like me. Think of what we have to deal with in terms of these Trinitarians, right? Not just the Protestants, of course. Right? It's out of control. So when you're dealing with people like this, like Myth Vision or Neil, the Gnostic Informant, or their group, well, I'm sure they got their nuts too. They also have people who are pretty reasonable, and they handle things respectfully in a way that, while they don't pull any punches and they're going to say things that are probably going to offend you. Well, we do that too, right? Well, we disagree strongly with each side. We're going to say things that show that. If you can't handle that, well, then you shouldn't be watching any kind of apologetic or contrarian show where there's going to be alternative points of view and it's going to escalate. That's normal. Yes, we should all try to keep it as respectful as possible. Well, we do that a lot with people, and eventually it either stays respectful or it breaks down. Think of Sam, right? We've done all we can. We're not here to pander to perverts. That's not who I think this guy is or who Neil is. I don't know them. Again, I'm not here to speak for them in a, broad sense. I'm just here to tell you that I like what they're doing overall from a contrary perspective. I respect their work. Now, that having been said, right, and I want to emphasize, I understand what they're dealing with, okay? I mean, look at how much it's taken for these guys to apologize. I've seen Myth Vision and Neil, Gnostic Informant, acknowledge just basic errors they've made, like we all do. Try getting that from some of these Trinitarian apologists, right? You can't do it. We still really haven't gotten, in my view, a very clear acknowledgement of the error, at least on the Isaiah scroll by Wes Huff. They just couldn't do it. They did what they could, I guess, but geez. Well, I mean, right there, to me, that shows they got a problem. I don't think these guys have that problem. Yes, we disagree. We've got other issues, but that's normal. We don't have the bitter history, at least I don't, with Myth Vision or Gnostic Informant or these other atheists or people, right? So it's a little easier for me to kind of speak this way and let you know that, hey, okay, this video over here on this channel, these are who these people are. You might be seeing some stuff. You just either have to know your faith or be prepared for contrary points of view and evidence you may not have heard before and either deal with it or not, right? If you're not able to withstand contrary points of view, it's not going to matter in the long run anyway. So if this stuff isn't for you, that's different. You don't have to watch me or Myth Vision or anybody. If you do, it's your choice, okay? Don't come to me with every single question that you can't answer because you don't take the time because you made the choice to hear it or listen to somebody else. So I do what I can. Prodigal son brought up 2 Kings 3. I'm going to talk about it in a moment. But I wanted to bring up Myth Vision as well and his friend Neil because, again, I've mentioned Neil before, the whole Wes Huff thing, and they talk about Yaho a lot, right? And the reason is because, like they and a lot of their guests have admitted and acknowledged, and everyone knows who studies this, Yahweh is everywhere, right? He's not just this tribal god. Now, they sometimes refer to him that way, and in one sense, yeah, he is, right? It's both. The reason why it's kind of confusing, I would say, is because it's both. He is a tribal-specific god, but everybody knows who he is. Now, why is that? Why does everybody know about Yaho? Okay, well, first of all, before I explain that, this is the video I'm going to be talking about a little. Where is it? I think it's on his, maybe videos. Yeah, right here. So, this is the video. Now, I'm not going to play it, but I'll put the link below. I haven't done it yet, but I will. It's right here. Okay. The untold story of Yahweh, how a defeated God became the one true God. Now, I don't believe that they established that in this video. Okay. So, obviously, and I don't believe that even the Moabite Stone that we're going to be discussing and they talk about presents Yahweh as a defeated God, right? So I don't agree with that description, but titles are titles, and that people can say what they want for whatever reason. Maybe that's just how they see it. Now, the guy he's interviewing on the left seems like a smart guy. He doesn't claim to be a biblical scholar, but he seems pretty smart. He probably knows the Bible pretty well. It's just not his focus, Either way, he's talking about Yahweh, and he talks about different things, Yahweh. And, he does reference the Moabite Stone, which we're going to read the whole inscription in a minute, translation, which is in the 9th century, dated to the 9th century. But then he says he doesn't see any evidence for worship of Yaho before the 6th century. So I don't know where he's getting that, right? Obviously, if we've got Yaho and the Moabite Stone being referenced and as his altars being taken away in battle, maybe that's what myth vision means by defeated, right? We'll get to it. Either way, that shows the worship didn't just start then, It didn't just begin in the 9th century, and that's in the 9th century, not the 6th century. Those are altars. So altar is indicative of worship. So you've got altars, and then you not only have the Moabite Stone of the 9th century, you've got the Tel Dan stele. Doesn't have the divine name, but it refers, I believe, to the house of David. Right? We have other kings referenced in these inscriptions. So I don't know why anyone would think that the worship of Yahweh began any earlier than the 9th century. And if it's established in the 9th century by inscriptions like this, I feel pretty safe in concluding that means it's been around for a while. We'll say at least the 10th century. I think that's fair. But now with the 13th century inscription at Mount Ebal, we're back further. Okay, so that still doesn't mean that that's where it began, though. That's just our earliest extra biblical evidence for this God and worship that we could attribute to him that may be consistent with the Bible's description. To me, it's pretty significant, all this evidence we have. I don't see it as in any way being limited to the 6th century in terms of worship. So either way, that's his view. And they don't really get into the details of the Moabite Stone. They don't really read it in terms of like the details in this video. It is kind of a general discussion, which is fine if that's what you want to do. But I wanted to bring it up because Prodigal Son brought it up, and I was also aware of this video where they discussed it. So I want to make sure you guys at least have our perspective well in mind, and you also understand what they're saying, okay? So if you want more details on what they think, you can watch this video and find out more. And there's also another guy he talked to who's actually, there's Neil, the guy I was talking about on the left. I kind of like that guy. I don't like, when I say like, I don't know these people, okay? I might dislike them completely if I ever met them. But watching them, they seem kind of, they seem like they're pretty, they seem like they believe what they're saying, okay? That to me is enough. If you really are genuine in your interests and belief and you're not a hypocrite like Sam, I don't care if you agree with me or not. This guy right here, I saw this video as well. This I think was a much better video, okay? This guy was pretty good. He even, I think, says it if I name correctly. Most of the time he said Yaho. And so I thought this was a good video, better than the one that I'm going to be directly relating to in terms of the 2 Kings. Not that this guy was like bad, but the other guy was much more dialed in, I think. And it was just a better discussion. I'll put both of those links below. So that's what I'm going to be kind of angling towards or about in this video and in future videos, not always with myth vision. Again, it'll be just videos. We kind of move out of the Trinity and other stuff and into more historical analyses and discussions with atheists and others. Trinitarians, right? I mean, that's over. We'll still have to do it though, right? They're not going anywhere. But in terms of like its necessity, that's not really a big issue anymore. So let's take a look though. All right, let's go to where we left off. I was talking about the Bible, right? Right before I tied it into myth vision. I was talking about how in the Bible, okay, so we talked about how we have this archaeological evidence and these inscriptions take us back, in my view, to the 13th century BCE, consistent with biblical events tied to the cursing of Mount Ebal. But in the Bible, we go back much further, as I said, right, all the way to Adam and Eve. Then we move forward to Seth. Right? Then we get to Noah. God talks to Noah and his sons after the flood. So right here in Genesis 9, this is the biblical version, okay? We've already covered the archaeological evidence, which I believe is earlier than the person that Myth Vision had on this most recent video. He said Moabite Stone was the earliest. I disagree. The 13th century inscription, Mount Ebal, is the earliest, and it's Yaho. We'll get to the Moabite in a moment, but let's work our way up to that. 2 Kings, right? We're in Genesis now, though. We're talking about the origin of Yahwism, biblically now. Okay, so we already know biblically, you can find it, divine name, worship of Yahweh, with Elohim, right? There's not like this, there's nothing that I can see in the Bible where you just switch from El to Elohim, and there's these different gods. No. I'm not saying that's not a possible theory or a possibility. Historically, I don't think you need to read it that way. Certainly not biblically. Now, these other nations and other groups and people, see, there's a reason why you have this variation, these differences in reference or similarities, and I'm going to show you why. So, remember, everybody knows about Yaho. There are literally inscriptions, writings, fragments. We've only discussed a few of them related to the Jews, right? The Hebrews, and some others like Diodorus. But Yaho is everywhere, okay? So in one sense, he is a tribal god, but in another sense, he's not. He's everywhere. Well, why is that? I believe because, like the Bible teaches, he's been known the whole time throughout creation, since at least the time of Adam and Eve, when they began to have children, and she thanked Yaho for the child. Then Cain and Abel began to sacrifice to Yaho, and then the ground was cursed by Yaho. And then we have Seth, we have Enosh, a calling on the name of Yaho. We have Noah, a relief to the land. And here we are, after the flood. God blessed Noah and his sons, Genesis 9:1, saying to them, be fruitful, increase in number, right? So he tells them all these things. Everything that lives will be food for you. Don't eat the meat. Whoever sheds blood, their blood will be shed. Be fruitful, increase in number. Now, let's read carefully here. Then God said, verse 8, to Noah and to his sons with him. These are everybody except for his wives. Little antivirus thing. I don't know why that pops up still. Okay? So biblically, we're talking about the Bible now. I understand many of you don't believe the Bible in it. Okay. We don't have like archaeological evidence for everything before the flood or immediately after. Everyone knows that. We have some things, but no one's expecting to have all this stuff right before and after the flood. At least not me. I don't think that's reasonable. Right? I mean, we have divine name inscriptions on the Moabite Stone and the Mount Ebal inscription from the 9th century to the 13th. Right? Well, those are both later, or at least the Moabite Stone similar to the Dipolon inscription, the Greek text on the cup of Nestor, right? 9th century. And the Linear B, the earliest Greek writing we have, is 15th century, 14th century. Well, they're right there. So there's just not a lot of evidence for many different cultures that came about after the flood. We have a lot of cuneiform and other writings and texts and things, but there are many cultures that we don't have much at all for that came about after the flood. But the fact that we have this much early material, right? I believe the evidence shows that the flood and or the events after the flood, right after, like right here, would have been around 3500 BCE. It's just my rough opinion on that. I'm still reviewing a lot of information. Nevertheless, after this, he talks to Noah and his sons, right? God establishes his covenant. And he gives them the rainbow. And then in verse 18, it says, the sons of Noah came out of the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Ham was the father of Canaan. These were the three sons of Noah, and from them came the people who were scattered over the whole earth. Noah manned the soil, he planted a vineyard, right? He laid in his tent, naked. Ham, the father of Canaan, saw his father naked and told his two brothers outside. Shem and Japheth took a garment and laid it across their shoulders, and they walked backward and covered their father's naked body. Their faces were turned the other way so they would not see their father naked. They were showing deference to their father, whereas Ham was ridiculing his father. Verse 24, when Noah woke from his wine and found out what his youngest son had done, he said, cursed be Canaan. Lowest of slaves he will be to his brothers. He also says, praise Yahweh, the God of Shem. May Canaan be slave of Shem. May God extend Japheth's territory. May Japheth live in the tents of Shem. May Canaan be the slave of Japheth. Okay, so you can see right here, Noah is blessing and cursing them in the name of Yahweh, based on the way he was treated. Now, I'm going to give you my own personal view of this and how I see this as a Christian, okay? These are all individuals being chosen or rejected, as God is progressively refining people since the fall of Adam and Eve in order to fulfill his prophecy about the coming of the seed, the preparation of the body, which becomes the Messiah. Okay, I'm not trying to prove that here, okay? I'm just giving you a little insight so you understand how I'm connecting this in a broader sense. I know. Neil and Myth Vision are like, what are you talking? Don't worry, I wasn't meant to convince you of anything. Just giving you my insight in my view. Okay, why this is happening at all. Why God allows any of this. There's more to it, of course. I'm giving you a little quick glimpse into what I'm seeing. Okay, so Noah is blessing and cursing his children, his sons, the only sons existing at this time according to the Bible, and who become responsible for the people throughout the world. They all know Yahweh. They're literally blessed and cursed by their father Noah in the name of Yahweh. And before that, they knew of Yahweh going all the way back as the God responsible for the birth of Cain, the God responsible for cursing the earth, the God whom they began to call upon before the flood, the God of Noah and his sons, in particular, and especially Shem. Now notice the prophecy in the name of Yahweh is that Canaan would be the slave of Shem. Okay, so everybody knows about Yahweh. Biblically, that's what we believe is why everybody after the flood knew about Yahweh. And before, but right, everything's gone from before the flood, pretty much. Certainly after the flood, right? In the time of all the Mesopotamian records, Sumerian records, Assyrian records, all these records that came about after the migration of peoples from the Ark in our view, in Turkey, down through into the areas where Nimrod set up his kingdom, right? Which is what happens after this. So as you can see, let's go to the next chapter. We're in chapter 9. You can see they all know about Yahweh. And something is prophesied to happen with regard to Canaan and Shem. Yahweh is specifically described as Shem's God. But he's also, Japheth is in the tents of Shem, right? Tents of Shem. Noah's God is Yahweh, right? So only Ham's son Canaan was cursed because of what Ham did, but they all knew of Yahweh. So everybody would have been aware of Yahweh and these things, not just right here after the flood, before the flood, during the flood, the storm. Remember that. We'll talk about Yaho as the storm god in another episode. But it goes on, right? It talks about the sons of Japheth after the flood. It talks about the accounts of Noah's sons and their descendants. It talks about the sons of Ham, which include Canaan, Cush, Nimrod. It gives more specifics about Canaan. It talks about the Canaanite clans being scattered and the borders of Canaan reaching from Sidon to Gerar, as far as Gaza, and then towards Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, and Zeboim, as far as Lasha. And the sons of Ham by their clans and languages. And then it says, these were also born to Shem. Gives the sons of Shem. Talks about the sons of Shem by their clans and their languages. Concludes the chapter by saying the clans of Noah's son, according to the lines descent within their nations. From these, the nations spread out over the earth after the flood. So biblically, in our view, historically, this is why everybody knew about Yaho. Because everybody knew about him before and after the flood. Now, of course, people who disagree with the Bible, they don't believe this part of the Bible, and they want to say, well, where's your archaeological evidence? Again, there are periods before and after the flood where there's no evidence of really anything, right? It takes time for these areas to develop and for records to be made and kept. And then that is when you see what? You see Yaho everywhere. You see Yaho in Canaan and elsewhere. Why? They all knew about him. But they all began to worship him in the way that they wanted to, which wasn't necessarily the way Shem was. That's why Yaho was specified as Shem's God, even though they were all either worshiping or knew and part of Noah's family who worshiped Yaho. Right? He was chosen to survive through the flood. Of course, Noah was worshiping Yaho. Right? So in Genesis 11, right after that, the descendants of all of Noah's children, we get the Tower of Babel, right? So right after the flood, excuse me, my throat gets a little dry, so I have to drink sometimes, keep it from kind of coughing, a little scratching. Apologize. All right, so they're all speaking the same language. They all know Yaho at this point in the same language. Then they travel down into the plain of Shinar, right? The area of Babylon. Built the Tower of Babel, which I believe we have historical evidence for. It talks about Yaho, again, coming down, confusing the languages, scattering people from across the whole earth, right? We have structures. We have the same brick today, or that we found today, built of the same brick then. And I believe we even have remnants of the Tower of Babel. It's referenced in Herodotus. Alexander the Great wanted to see it, right? So this is, I believe, related directly to history. Now, you can disagree, but this is how we understand these events, the origin and history of Yaho and the worship of Yaho. This is just part one. I'm giving an overview. I'm going to get into more details of a lot of these accounts and other accounts. First, I'm giving you an overview of how I understand these accounts, and then we're going to deal with the problem, the so-called problem in 2 Kings 3. In each episode, I'll do the same thing. I'll give a further overview or a closer view into some of the parts we generally discussed, as well as address an issue that people have brought up that allegedly creates a problem for what I consider to be true Yahwism. All right, so then we get the account of Shem's family line after the Tower of Babel. So it goes on to describe the descendants of Shem further, gets all the way down to Terah, and then Terah becomes father to Avram. Then we get an account in Genesis 11 of Terah's family line, including Avram. Terah became father of Avram, Nahor, and Haran. Haran became the father of Lot. While his father Terah was still alive, Haran died in Ur of the Chaldeans, Mesopotamia. Right? So after the migration of the flood, down through Babylonia, into Sumer, that's where we are. Verse 29, just 11, Avram and Nahor both married. The name of Avram's wife was Sarai. The name of Nahor's wife was Milcah. Verse 31, Terah took his son Avram, his grandson Lot, son of Haran, and his daughter-in-law Sarah, the wife of his son Avram, and together they set out from Ur of the Chaldeans, Mesopotamia, to Canaan. But when they came to Haran, they settled there. Terah lived 205 years, and he died in Haran. Okay, so now we're at the point where we're after the flood. Everybody knows who Yahweh is, or has developed traditions since the time right after the flood, when the events we read about earlier involving Noah and his sons took place. A sufficient time is established now, right, several centuries, to where while everybody still knows Yahweh, everybody, they're now developing their own traditions in ways that don't line up with what he wants. So this ties in directly with the events involving Noah and his sons. When Yahweh saw that Ham was the way he was, he knew he couldn't choose and use him to bring forth the body of his son. So he set up the arrangement that would establish Shem's line and make, in this imperfect world, right, just destroyed, it was so bad, the arrangements necessary for him to bring about the Messiah, which would involve Canaan becoming slave to Shem. How does that happen? Avram is the descendant of Shem, right here. So Avram's family was going to Canaan. They stopped in Haran, and Avram's father died. Now, look at what Yahweh does. Where were we? Okay, so we're going to go to 12. Right after Terah dies in Haran, they're on their way to Canaan from Mesopotamia. Yahweh says to Abraham, Genesis 12, go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you, make your name great. Whoever curses you, etc., makes the promises. So Avram went as Yahweh said to him. Lot went with him, Sarai, their possessions, and they set out for the land of Canaan, and they arrived there. Avram traveled through the land as far as the site of the great tree of Moreh in Shechem. At that time, the Canaanites were in the land. Yahweh appeared to Avram and said, to your offspring, I will give this land. So Avram built an altar there to Yahweh, who had appeared to him. This is in Canaan, okay? So we're post-flood. Everybody knows who Yahweh is. Yahweh picks a descendant of Shem because he looked favorably upon Shem and Japheth and the way they treated their father, making Shem the most desirable to use for the line of the Messiah. So Yahweh picks a descendant of Shem, brings him to Canaan, where they already know Yahweh. They just weren't, Yahweh didn't choose anyone in Canaan because the Canaanites are descendants of Ham. And we all saw how Ham acted toward his father. So Yahweh is not choosing the descendants of Ham in Canaan, regardless of whether they worship him. And they did. And many other deities, right? Right. Because everybody who survived with Noah knew what happened before the flood. that there were all these sons of God everywhere and things were going insane. Either way, they all knew Yahweh. They all took that knowledge of Yahweh throughout the earth. Shem was chosen as the one through whose line the Messiah would come and that Canaan would be subservient to. Abraham is chosen. He's in Canaan, sets up an altar, starts worshiping Yahweh, and gets the promise from him. So this is how Yahweh became so well known. Right? There are many other events. And again, this is just the opening general introduction to my view, primarily related to the Bible, as we've been discussing, but also before that, related to the instances of the divine name, which indicate Yahwism, worship of Yahweh, Yaho, all the way back to at least the 13th century BCE. Okay? But the Jews had an oral tradition, like many cultures, that spanned far earlier, that was far earlier. So we're not limited to just the specific archaeological findings. Those are important. Those are key markers, critical markers, but they also show a development to that point. And then when you tack on the oral tradition, it's hard to say exactly where that takes you, right? So you should be cautious either way. According to the Bible, though, Abraham was chosen in Mesopotamia, taken to Canaan, or on the way, right? He chose Abraham from Ur to Haran, and then in Canaan he began to worship him with the altar. And then various events continue, right, with him and Lot, Sodom, Gomorrah, Melchizedek. So everybody knows about Yaho, right? Melchizedek. That is why, in my and other people's view, you find so many different references to Yaho in many non-Hebrew, non-Israelite cultures or related to them, because everybody knew about Yaho. They all started out with their understanding through the different descendants of Noah and Noah himself. And ultimately, Yahweh chose a descendant of Shem to establish his worship through that descendant and promise that the seed would come, build a nation, and make Canaan subservient to Shem in fulfillment of the prophecy that Noah gave. So that's a general view of how I and others understand the origin and development, the spread of Yahwism, at least through to the first century, basically. First century, we'll say BCE or CE, because I'm going to pick up more from the first century CE in future videos. But we've definitely covered all the way through the time of the text I cited, 4Q Leviticus B. The chart I showed earlier, goes further into the first and following centuries CE, but nevertheless, I just wanted to give a general overview so you can get a better sense, right? You see the text we read from Genesis 9, 10, 11, 12. You've got to familiarize yourselves with those things. You got to make sure you know the basic history, if not all of the history of the Bible, and the different descendants, right? You don't have to know like every single relationship of all the different descendants of Noah, but you need to know the basic descendant lines, and you certainly need to know Shem's line, right? So that you understand the development of the worship of Yahweh through Abraham, in spite of the fact that the other descendants of Noah's sons also knew about and worshiped Yahweh, along with many others that they knew about or came to know about. So, and this tacks on, of course, with traditions associated with individuals like Nimrod, right? So these things developed as well after the flood. And then along with Yahwism, built all of these different cosmologies or theologies and systems of worship identities of these gods, whether made up or associated directly with traditions and histories before the flood, or as I said, after, with people like Nimrod. All right, so let's take a look at an account in the Bible. Now, the video I showed you earlier, right here. So he brings up how in the Moabite Stone, and you saw in the way that the video, right? The video is labeled how Yahweh was defeated. So what really happened here? Why did they say that, and what does that mean? You know, again, in the video, the guest he has says that the worship of Yahweh is basically tied to the earliest is the Moabite Stone inscription, but then he says it's the 6th century, which is like 300 years after that. Either way, the earliest reference we have is actually the 13th century. He just may not have known that. It was found within the last 2 years, but still, we'll just say maybe he just didn't know. As he said, he's not a biblical scholar, so it's possible. I believe it's actually 13th century is our earliest form of the divine name, Yaho, and that also presupposes an earlier tradition or belief system associated with him, consistent with the biblical records, and that the reason we have not as much information going back even further is because, like with many cultures after the flood, we just don't have that much until time has developed. The different languages developed after the Tower of Babel. And so it ties in with that. But nonetheless, I believe we have sufficient extra biblical evidence for Yahwism, again, all the way into the 13th century. And then biblically, we have a perfect explanation historically for how it is that, in spite of the fact that people want to say that this is a tribal God, just this limited group of people, right? Just this small house of potential Davidites, right? No, there was much more to it than that, because everybody already knew about Yaho. The difference with the Israelites is God chose them, in our view. So even though all these other cultures and nations knew of Yaho because they all received it from the people who descended from Noah and his sons, they weren't chosen. The Hebrews were. So that's why it takes on a tribal look as well. It becomes the tribal worship of Yaho, specifically as the Israelites do it, or those who join them as alien residents and who similarly worship Yaho. This is how people became familiar with it as well, along with the spreading of texts like the Septuagint. But even before that, with the intermingling of cultures, right, the enslavement of the Israelites, the reason why, you know, and in one of these videos, they were talking about different things, how you have Babylonian names, but you also have Judean names. Well, that's because the Jews were made slaves of the Babylonians multiple times, and they lived with them for a long time and intermingled with them. So they would have many people in their courts and in their lands that either are directly Jews or have intermingled with them and taken on Jewish names. That's also what you have at Elephantine. Whenever you have communities or cultures nearby each other for a long time and intermingling, right? The Jews were manning a garrison there. They had a very specific reason at Elephantine. We'll talk more about that another time. That'll be another part of this series. But I just wanted to give you an introduction, right? An overview of how I understand the origin and development of Yahwism, both archaeologically and biblically, through to at least the point after the flood where Abraham was chosen and began worshiping Yahweh in the land of Canaan. That was where I kind of left things off biblically. Textually, we talked about the inscription from the 13th century. I'll put a link to a video about it below, and all the way through to at least the 1st century BCE. And then we'll talk more about the centuries from the 1st century CE in subsequent videos. Now let me bring up the Moabite Stone issue in this whole 2 Kings 3 thing. Right, so I'll just bring up the inscription. This is the Mesha Stele, or Moabite Stone. It's written in Moabite, a language, part of the Semitic family of languages. So it talks about the victories of King Mesha of Moab over Israel and Judah. And here is the inscription. I'm going to read it, starting with this enumerated part. This is the actual inscription, what it says from the translator. The translator, put a link to this below, is Andre Lemaire. Hopefully I said that right. Is a professor of Hebrew and Aramaic philology and epigraphy in the Department of Historical and Philological Sciences at the École Pratique des Hautes Études at the Sorbonne in Paris. He works in the fields of Northwest Semitic epigraphy, archaeology, and ancient Hebrew literature and history. So this is what the Moabite Stone says from the 9th century. I am Mesha, son of Chemosh, king of Moab, the Dibonite. My father ruled over Moab 30 years, and I ruled after my father. I made this high place for Chemosh in Kiriol, high place of salvation, for he saved me from all the kings and made me enjoy the sight of my enemies. Omri, king of Israel, oppressed Moab for a long time because Chemosh was angry with his country. His son succeeded him, and he also declared, I will oppress Moab. In my days he declared thus, but I enjoyed his view and that of his house. Israel was destroyed forever, or Israel was in ruins. There's a couple ways you can translate that. Omri had taken possession of the land. Obviously, Israel hadn't been destroyed forever at this point. Omri had taken possession of the land of Madaba, and he dwelt in it during his days and during half my days, his sons 40 years. But Chemosh restored it during my days. I built Baal Meon, and I made reservoir in it. I built Kiriathaim, and the men of Gad dwelt in the land of Atarat from ancient times, and the kings of Israel had built Atarat, but I fought against the city and took it. Now this is in Moab, this Atarat that the Israelites built. That's in East Jordan today. He says, I fought against this city and took it. I killed the entire population. This is the king of Moab. The city belonged to Chemosh and to Moab, and I brought back from there the hearth altar of his well-beloved, and I installed it before Chemosh in my capital. I settled down there the men of Sharon and the men of Maharat. Chemosh said to me, go take Nebo from Israel. I went in the night and I fought there from dawn until noon. And I took it and killed everyone, 7,000 men, boys, women, daughters, and pregnant women, because I devoted it to Ashtar Chemosh. I took from there the hearth, altars of Yaho, and I brought them before Chemosh. The kings of Israel had built Yahaz, and he lived there while fighting against me. But Chemosh drove him out before me. I took 200 men of Moab and all its divisions, and I led them against Yahaz, and I took it to add it to Dibon. I built Kiriho, the wall of its parks, and the wall of the citadel. I built its gates, its towers, a royal place. I made the retaining walls of the water reservoir within the city. There had not been a cistern within the city, in Kiriho. And I said to all the people, build for yourselves a cistern, each one in his house. I had Kiriho's ditches dug by the Israelite prisoners. I built Aroer, and made the road in Arnon. I rebuilt Beth Bamoth, because it had been destroyed, rebuilt Beezer, because it was in ruins. The men of Dibon were fitted out for war, because all Dibon is my guard. I ruled over hundreds of cities that I added to the land. I built the temple of Madaba, the temple of Diblatin, and the temple of Baal Meon. I transported there the small cattle of the land. The house of David dwell in Horonan. And Chemosh said to me, go fight against Horonan. I went down and fought against the city and took it. Chemosh restored it in my days, and I made it up 10 and I. Okay, I wanted to read the whole thing first. We're going to go back and look at just parts of it. I wanted to make sure you understood what the inscription is, okay? Now, let me bring up for you a highlighted account of text from 2 Kings. All right, these are texts that I just took from a Bible translation that won't have any reading issues. I'm just going to make it big so everyone can see it really clearly. Too big. There we go. All right, so this is 2 Kings. Let's just read it together. I'll keep my face off there. 2 Kings 3:18. Now, before I go into this reading mode, so this is allegedly a contradiction. And the myth vision video I showed you earlier, they don't really kind of get into the text and read it like we did, but they refer to it and they refer to this account. Well, they mostly just say that Yahweh was defeated there, like you saw in the title of Myth Vision's video. Okay, well, let's just look at, you saw how the Moabite Stone described it, right? So let's look at what the Bible says. The question will be, is what the Bible's saying in contradiction to the Moabite Stone, or do they agree? And if they agree, do they show that Yahweh was defeated in a way that contradicts the Bible, or is it a problem for Yahwists like me? Okay, so here's the account. Let's read it together and we're done. Verse 18, and this will indeed be a trivial thing in the eyes of Jehovah, and he will certainly give Moab into your hand. Okay, this is the key part here, right? That in red. So how does this actually come to be fulfilled? Oh, right here. I'm sorry. This top part at the top is what I was referring to. Let's find out. So he's going to give the Israelites, he's going to give Moabite into the Israelites' hand. Verse 19, and you must strike down every fortified city and every choice city, and every good tree you should fell, and all the springs of water you should stop up, and every good tract of land you should mar with stones. Okay, so that's also part of the prophecy of what would take place with regard to Moab. Verse 20, and it came about in the morning at the time of going up in the grain offering, that, look, water was coming from the direction of Edom, and the land came to be filled with water. As regard all the Moabites, they heard that the kings had come up to fight against them. Consequently, they called together men from as many as were girding on a belt and upward, and they began standing at the boundary. When they got up early in the morning, the sun itself flashed upon the water, so that the Moabites from the opposite side saw the water red like blood. And they began to say, this is blood. The kings have unquestionably been put to the sword, and they went striking one another down. So now to the spoil, O Moab. Verse 24. And when they came into the camp of Israel, the Israelites immediately rose up and began striking the Moabites down, so that they took to flight from before them. Hence they came into Moab, striking the Moabites down as they came. I'm going to put in yellow and the red what I believe is the fulfillment of this prophecy in verses 18 and 19. So they enter Moab, start striking them down. Verse 25, the cities they went throwing down. As for every good tract of land, they would pitch each one his stones and actually fill it. And every spring of water they would stop up, and every good tree they would fell until they left only the stones of Kiriar Etcheth. I'm sorry, I have a little question mark here, so the actual letter's missing. Apologize. Remaining in it. And the slingers began going around it and striking it down. Sometimes the text import that I do from this translation changes. This is hard to tell if that's the real word. So I apologize again. Either way, this is all fulfillment. Verse 26, when the king of Moab saw that the battle proved too strong, he at once took up with him 700 men drawing sword to break through to the king of Edom, but they were not able to. Finally, he took his firstborn, who was going to reign in place of him, and offered him up as a burnt sacrifice upon the wall. And there came to be great indignation against Israel. Now this description here, great indignation against, it really, I mean, it means that. It really just means like great pain on. Al is the preposition against. It can mean that as well, but great pain on Israel. To me, when I read it, more so seemed to indicate that Israel was pained or felt this great pain once they saw the king of Moab sacrificing his firstborn on the wall. And so look what happens. So that they pulled away from against him and returned to their land. And then later in the account, verse 31 and 32, it says, Jehu himself did not care to walk in the law of Jehovah, the God of Israel, with all his heart. He did not turn aside from the sins of Jeroboam, I think that is, with which he caused Israel to sin. In those days, because of the question marks, it's not clear, but in terms of the context, in those days, Jehovah started to cut off Israel piece by piece, and Hazael kept striking them in all the territory of Israel, from the Jordan toward the rising sun, and all the land of Gilead, the Gadites, the Reubenites. It describes all these areas in the torrent valley of Arnon. So this is all after the fulfillment of this prophecy. Look at the prophecy again. It says, he will certainly give Moab into your hand. Okay, what does that involve? Verse 19, they're going to strike down every fortified city and every choice city. Every good tree they're going to fell, and all the springs they're going to stop up, and every good land they're going to mar with stones. That's exactly what happens. They go into Moab, they strike the Moabites down, they throw down the cities and every good tract of land. They pitch with stone and fill it. Every spring of water they stop up, and every good tree they fell. They only leave certain stones left, and the slingers go around and strike it down. The king of Moab tries to fight back, but he can't do it. He's not able to. Only after sacrificing his firstborn do the Israelites leave. So everything that was said in that prophecy in verses 18 and 19 of 2 Kings 3 was fulfilled in 2 Kings 3, 24 through 26. Before the Moabite king sacrificed his firstborn. Now, my view of this is that, again, I understand all these nations as having their own gods, their own princes, right? Israel has Michael, the angel of Yaho. They have Yaho. So these gods, there's something they benefit from. There's a reason why historically all these cultures and groups have all practiced a form of sacrifice. Because it does something, I believe. And you can disagree, whatever you want. The fact is, all these cultures practiced a form of this, and it meant something to them. Regardless of what you think it actually did, when the Israelites saw the king sacrificing his firstborn, that caused them a problem. But they had already fulfilled the prophecy. Prophecy didn't say they would annihilate every single person in Moab or all the Moabites. That's not what it said. So now let's go back to the Moabite stone, okay? Let's see if the Moabite stone agrees with what we just read in 2 Kings. I believe it does. Pretty much. Let's see. So let's look at it again. We won't read everything, but we'll read enough. Right? So, king of Moab, father ruled over Moab 30 years, and he ruled after his father. He made this high place for Chemosh, because he saved him from all the kings that made him enjoy the sight of his enemies. And then he lists them. Omri, king of Israel, oppressed Moab for a long time. And he says, Chemosh was angry with him, right? Well, if you believe the Bible, then you know that, well, biblically, I would say these things are all happening in agreement, right? When the nations, when the prince, in my view, again, this is biblically, when the spirit princes don't agree with each other, there's a physical war. When they do, when they work things out in ways like we see with the Israelites being taken captive, well, then that's what happens. Michael wants the Israelites to be punished because their leaders are horrible, and he knows they need to be punished if he's going to finish the job and bring forth the Messiah correctly, the way he wants it. So he lets them be punished so they get corrected. There are times, though, when the nations go too far, like we read in Zechariah chapters 1 through 3, right? And then Yahweh will send an angel to punish those nations. Yahweh is watching everything, but he lets things happen for different reasons. Okay, so right here we can see that for whatever reason, whether it's Chemosh or Yahweh, the Moabite Stone says Israel oppressed Moab for a long time because Chemosh was angry with his country. His son succeeded him, and he also declared, I will oppress Moab. Talking about the son of the king of Israel. In my days he declared thus, but I enjoyed his view and that of his house. Israel was destroyed forever. Look, it says, but before that it said, Omri had taken possession of the land of Madaba, and he dwelt in it in his days, and during half of my days, his sons, 40 years. Okay, so those are the Israelites. For 40 years taking possession of the land of Madaba, according to the Moabite Stone. So it says that the king of Israel oppressed Moab for a long time. His son succeeded him. And then, even though Israel was put in ruins, Omri had taken possession of the land and dwelt in it for half of his days, 40 years. Chemosh restored it, and then he built Baal Meon. And then it says, the men of Gad dwelt in the land of Atarat from ancient times, and the king of Israel had built Atarat. That's in Moab. But the Israelites are there. And he says they've been there from ancient times. But then he went against the city and took it. And he killed the entire population. Right? So there's multiple battles being described here at different times. Some of them clearly involve the Israelites defeating Moab for a long time and possessing the land for up to 40 years of Madaba. And Gad from ancient times before it was taken from them. And then it says, when they took back Atarat, he brought back from there the hearth altar, installed it before Chemosh. And then Chemosh said, go take Nebo from Israel. He went and fought there, killed everyone. And he took the altars of Yahweh and brought them before Chemosh. So very clearly, right, we have descriptions and accounts on the Moabite Stone that are absolutely consistent with the events of 2 Kings chapter 3, which are themselves consistent with each other. And we have mention of the altars of Yahweh on the Moabite Stone in the 9th century, together with the Tel Dan stele of the 9th century, and the Mount Ebal inscription from the 13th century, all of which indicate the worship of Yahweh for a long time, which would have required that they had already been worshiping and knew about Yahweh before the 13th century find at Mount Ebal. And of course, when we consider the oral tradition that we know the Jews had, it's very easy to see how all this connects back through to the events described in the Bible, from Genesis chapter 2 at least, where the events described in relation to Yahweh through to the birth of Cain, and the cursing of the land, and the calling upon the name of Yahweh again, and the bringing forth of Noah, his sons, and thereafter the selection of Shem, the one who worshiped Yahweh in a particular way, different both from Japheth and Ham, but closer to Japheth, who would dwell in his tents. but Ham's son Canaan would be his slave, which was fulfilled through the picking of Abraham, Shem's son, descendant, and bringing him to Canaan, where he began to worship and sacrifice to Yahweh. So I will discuss further the development and history of Yahwism from the time that Abraham entered the land of Canaan, biblically and archaeologically, in my next video. And I will also pick an issue or an item from the Bible or related text that's considered problematic and discuss it further as well. So thank you for joining me. And if you have any questions, please put them below.